Okay, so we'll go underneath and have a look at the steering. So just looking from the back, you can see the steering. I think of it as the steering starting there at the power steering box there, I guess you call it. And there's the pitman arm, which comes back to this horizontal bar, which is called the drag link. And when you steer the wheel, it's the drag link that moves back and forth, driven by the pitman arm. Now the idler arm is what I suspect is bad here. That's this arm here, which kind of supports the right-hand side of the drag link and just keeps it stable going back and forth. And of course, then we have the inner and outer tie rod ends that go out to the wheel. So there's the inner, and then out of the wheel, the outer tie rod end there that hooks into the spindle and moves the wheel back and forth. And of course the same kind of thing on the other side. Now the idler arm, so we'll first have to take this nut off, cotter pin in the nut, and then we're going to pop the idler arm out from the drag link. And then the idler arm is held to the frame by 2 bolts, which you can kind of barely see up there. And I think to access those, they're not really accessible from above without moving fan parts and fan shroud. But I think if we take the these sway bar bushing mounts, these sway bar bushing 2 bolts out, this side and the other side, we should be able to swing down the sway bar, which will then give us access to the 2 bolts. I don't know if you can see that on camera. I'm trying to shine the light. There's 1 bolt, and then there's 1 further up that hold the idler arm to the frame. Just going over to this 70s Pontiac here, it's a little easier to see. It's a very similar steering system in all these GM cars and trucks through the 60s, 70s, 80s. Here you can see the idler arm, which is new on this car, is there, and it bolts to the frame there with 2 bolts. A lot more room here. You can access those 2 bolts quite nicely from up here. And pull the idler arm, but it's the same setup. There's a steering box over here, power steering, pitman arm, drag link that goes back and forth, supported by the idler arm on this side, and then out to the 2 tie rod ends there, 1 on that side, and of course 1 on the other side. So this car, I've already checked. When you move the steering wheel back and forth, that idler arm doesn't rock up and down so much. So I'm starting to think that it's the idler arm on this Syclone. Okay, so we'll start with this cotter pin here. All right, the cotter pin's out, so now we'll try and spin this nut off. Now, this is kind of a review of this thing too. This is the new Ryobi high torque 1/2-inch impact. It just came out, I think, a few months ago. It's the, I don't know if you can see that. $1,170 foot-pounds apparently. So we'll see how it works. I don't even know how tight these are, but we'll see how it works. Our socket on there. Perfect. Now we'll have to pop this out with a puller. Okay, we'll drop the sway bar down now so we can access those idler arm bolts. There's a 15mm nut on the back of these sway bar arm bolts, so I'll try and get a wrench on there. It's a little awkward, not too bad. All right, these idler arms aren't always easy to get off. I have gotten this one loose now, but it wasn't easy. I used a combination of, I tried this Pitman arm puller. These jaws are too thick, they don't really fit and grab onto the idler arm very good. And there's this little guy, it's really floppy. I couldn't get it, kept slipping. The other thing you can do is from this side, from the wheel side, you can take the wheel off, bang on it with a pickle fork, bang, bang, bang. I banged on it like crazy, I could not get it to budge. Heated it with a torch. Eventually, I ended up buying a new tool. This is the OTC 7311A, 7311A, and it's a Pitman arm puller, but it's a bit fancier than your typical Pitman arm puller. It has these cross bolts. I just put a nut on there as well, just because I thought I'd use a nut instead of the wing nut. And these jaws are thinner, so they were able to fit up there. And then you crank these wing nuts down and actually squeeze the puller so it doesn't slip, so you get a good grip. So there's lots of room to work here. So that would just sit up there on the actual joint there, and then this piece here pushes against your threaded nut. So I put that on there, tightened everything up, and started cranking it, and it popped right loose right away. So this OTC tool was what was required to pop that loose. They're about $100, so they're not cheap, but I guess you get what you pay for. It is quite a nice tool. The bolts it comes with are grade 2 bolts. I put some grade 5 bolts in because I've heard that the bolts under stress will stretch. That's the one modification I did, is better bolts. But it worked. We got it out. And then I've lowered the sway bar here so we can access the bolts to the frame, the idler arm to the frame. So sway bar, bushing, and then here at the on the bottom of the control arm there, the sway bar, I just dropped it down. So that gives me some room here to get a wrench up there. You see I've got a socket and a ratchet on that nut. It's an 18 millimeter nut, 18 millimeter, and it's quite tight. And actually it's not necessary to put a ratchet on the other side, because on the wheel side here there's holes in the frame where you can access the bolts that hold that idler arm on. And you see I've just got a 18 millimeter wrench on that side to hold the nut, and an extension and an 18 millimeter socket here, so we can easily pop out the bottom bolt and the top bolts right up in there. We'll go ahead and pull those out, and then we should be able to pull this arm off. If our wrench doesn't fall off. And then once those bolts are out, there's the idler arm. Yes, there's a lot of rocking going on. You can feel it and hear it. It's sloppy. And they're not that expensive. A new one, an AC Delco one, was like $40, so we'll put a new one on and see if that fixes our steering slop. All right, and there's the new one. I think it looks right. Yep. There's no play in this one at all. Comes with a couple new grease fittings and a new nut and a cotter pin. Okay, let's put this one on. Like I said, about $40, AC Delco delivered. not bad. There's cheaper ones out there. There's no-name ones for like 20 bucks, but it's a lot of work to do this. And if you're going to go through the trouble of putting something like this in, you may as well put a higher quality piece in. Put an original type piece in, because I don't want to do this twice. Okay, I got the idler arm tucked up there. We'll just clean the area a bit where it's going to go in. You see it's just sitting here kind of loose up there. So we'll put it in here. Put some grease on in the hole there to help it seat in. I think I'll put it in here first, and then we'll put the 2 bolts into the frame back here. Once we got it started in the center link. All right, we got the bolts, the 2 18 millimeters at the frame tightened up. There's slots in those bolts in the mounts on the frame. What I did is I measured from the tie rod end bottom here to the bottom of the frame on both sides, on the left side and the right side, and tried to position the idler arm so that it was basically the distance from here to here is equal, roughly equal. So the center link is kind of level with the frame of the, kind of level with the vehicle. So when it's moving back and forth, it's level. So that's what I did. Those are tightened up, and then the last step is just to put this little castle nut on here, and we'll get it tightened up. There's a torque spec that I may or may not include in the comments. And then we'll tighten it around just so we can get our cotter pin in. Change the angle of the camera here a little bit. And cotter pin. There we go. And that's it. So now, I think what we'll find is that we won't have that up and down movement. No, and no, we don't, not at all. See, before, when I pushed on the center link, it was rocking up and down, so that when you turn the steering wheel, before the center link moved out toward the wheels, it would move up and down a little bit first. That was the slop in the steering wheel. Now, see, that center link is being held solid and will be held nice and solid and level as it goes back and forth, so that as soon as you get input from the steering, through the steering, the pitman arm, it's going to immediately be transferred out to the wheels through the center link. So that's it. Sloppy idler arm will fix your play or shimmying or steering problem sometimes. And check it by seeing if it moves up and down. Thanks for watching, everybody. Catch you on the next one.